Good morning, class. So I decided to do, instead of a live stream video, I decided to do a regular video that you could watch whenever you want at your own pace, because that was my cat. Because I know that everybody's schedules are different, and so if I had a live stream video at a set time, maybe some of the class could come, but not everybody could come. So I'm just gonna record this and we're gonna go over the lesson for the day. Some of you guys had some questions that I want to just cover right now before we get into the lesson. But as far as modules, we're going through module 1 today and for the rest of the week. We'll start module 2 next week. So Cedarville set up the class. They started very early in January. I think they're about 2 weeks off of pacing from us right now. And so some of the dates that are in that class aren't accurate yet. I went through and changed module 2's dates so that they're not showing up for this week, but I'm going to change them generally weekly. So right now we're in module 1. Any assignment you see for any other module does not apply, just module 1. So we had the syllabus quiz and the discussion board that they were both due yesterday. Today you have a video that you have to do. It's a 30-second video, so make sure you can watch a short video clip for it. I think it's the biblical anthropology video. Make sure you watch a short clip for that inside the video assignment, and then you upload your own 30-second response. And then on Thursday we have 2 more videos. They're each 30-second videos that we'll have to do, and then there'll be an end of week quiz. So we have 4 more assignments remaining for this module, which is module 1, and then we'll start module 2 next week. So if you have any questions or you're running into any problems, please email me sooner rather than later. And I'll be fielding those emails all day today, so just make sure to reach out as soon as you can. If you're having any issues with Canvas, please reach out immediately. I can help you get that resolved, but the sooner you reach out, the better it'll be, because again, just a reminder, there is no late work in this class. The professor overseeing this course allows no late assignments unless you reach out first and you clear it with me and I clear it with him generally. So make sure that anything that is assigned to you, you get done on the due date or before. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into the lesson today. We're gonna be talking about 2 things. The first is biblical anthropology, and that really is gonna tie into economics. And this is from one of our 2 texts that we have. So this is No Free Lunch, Economics for a Fallen World, and this is the 3rd edition. And this is available as an ebook for you if you go to the syllabus. This book and the other book are both available in the syllabus as free ebooks. So I'd recommend that you download a copy of each of those and have those on your iPad or on your laptop, or you can save it in your files on your phone so you have it readily available. I've gone ahead for myself and printed out copies. The Economics for a Fallen World, No Free Lunch, it's like 500 plus pages, so you might not want to print that out all in one shot, but it's just really good to have the course text available so that you can look at it. If you're not an ebook kind of person, you're a hard copy person, go ahead and print that out. But otherwise, just save a file for yourself so you can access it without having to continually go back to Cedarville's Canvas and then the syllabus to keep opening that link. So what we're talking about today is biblical anthropology, and the author starts out with 4 principles of biblical anthropology. And the first principle is that we are created in the image of God. So that's biblical anthropology principle number 1. We are created in the image of God. Principle number 2 is God gives individuals different gifts and different talents. So this is going to kind of funnel into economics when we see about how some people are more gifted with leading companies than other people. Some people are more gifted at money management than other people, right? So God gives individuals different gifts and talents. Principle number 3 is humans are dependent and finite beings. So we can't generally go through life by ourselves. Like, the idea of this entirely self-sufficient person is really, for the most part, a myth. It's very difficult to navigate life without being social and working with other people. And then the 4th principle is we are corrupted by the fall. And this is going to also funnel into economics as far as we see a lot of selfishness and self-interest. Not that working for a better future for ourselves and our families is wrong, but a lot of times when we see economic exchanges in the world, it's tainted by the fall and tainted by some of that selfishness. So now, the author of the book, Jeff Hammond, he's going to start exploring, like, what does that mean for economics then? If we look at biblical anthropology and we look at those four principles, what does that mean as far as the best economic system? Because there are really three patterns that we could choose from if we're building an economic system. And one would be the free market system. And we typically today would call that capitalism. And looking at this from a biblical standard, right, we're going to look at, like, does God prefer one over the other? And Jeff Heyman is going to say that that's the wrong question. We're asking the wrong question. We should be asking a different question. We should be asking mostly, like, how can I conform my economic activities to God's pattern, right? Like, what can I do to bend myself to biblical principles instead of which is God's favorite economic system? So first of all, if we're looking free markets, there's very little governmental restriction. There's private property ownership, and individuals are generally free to do with their private property what they want to do with it. In communism, there is no private property in theory. Now, in practice, we'll talk about that can be different, but in theory, there is no private property. So the government owns all the means of production, like all businesses, and any of the fruits of your labor, the government, it's not really your fruits, it may be your labor, but it's the people's fruits. And then socialism is kind of a mix of the two in a sort of way. The idea of socialism is there may be some private property, but the government owns the means of production. So, like, the government owns companies. Major corporations are owned by the government. And to a large extent, even like mid-level corporations are owned by the government. And there's a large amount of taxation and a lot of redistribution of production or wealth through government. So the author, Jeff Heyman, is going to point to the fact that he thinks that while the Bible doesn't endorse one system of economics over another necessarily, that it seems to be that free markets seem to line up most with the principles God sets forth in Scripture, especially private property ownership. And he goes to Exodus 20:17 with the Ten Commandments. And in the book on page 17, it also says in Exodus, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servants, or his female servants, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." And this really shows private property ownership. If you hear any weird sounds going on, by the way, that's my cat being crazy. But this points to private property ownership. So in the Bible, God is saying that's theirs. They own that. Don't long after that. Don't want it as your own. It's theirs. So also, he's going to point out, he's going to go down a rabbit trail about an ox being a means of production, which it's mentioned in Exodus. It's also mentioned in Proverbs. And like, that's kind of coveting your neighbor's means of production. Today, if you were a farmer, that'd be like your neighbor's tractor or something to that effect. So he also goes to the parable of the talents, the idea of being a good steward with what we have and producing more with what we've been given. So that would be a free market principle for the most part. Now, honestly, he's going to go into some, I would say, more higher level economic principles here about socialism. But the basic gist of socialism and communism, both that he's going to get to, is that they're tainted by the fall. That we can't truly be altruistic because we're selfish. So since we're selfish beings because of the fall, it's going to be nearly impossible for us to hold common property without being selfish, right? If you and your neighbor both want to use the people's shovel at the same time, that's probably going to lead to a dispute or a disagreement or an argument. If you and your neighbor both want to use the people's car, the government's car at the same time, since you can't own a car, that's probably going to lead to a dispute. Someone has to win, someone has to lose, right? So he's going to say, even with the leadership in communism, that oftentimes those leaders rule over the people, they live extravagantly while the people suffer. And it also tends to, honestly, Uh, it tends to lead to a loss in production, which we'll see throughout the class. There's a quip in here that the author brings out that under communism, someone said in the Soviet Union, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. So it does lead to some extent, a loss in production. So also with the free markets, hopping back to free markets, individuals make choices, right? The individuals make choices. So generally speaking, we can say like, oh, Walmart suffered a loss, Walmart did this, Walmart did that, but ultimately it's individuals in the company that are making choices and individuals in the company that are driving those decisions, and they cause the company, which is made up of people, to suffer a loss. So a lot of times, a lot of people in that company will suffer loss as well. But the concept is called methodological individualism. And this is the idea that only individuals, people, make choices, suffer loss, and accrue gains. And so Ludwig von Mises, he was an economist, and to illustrate this, he said, the hangman, not the state, executes the criminal. Right? So we might see, even today, there's capital punishment in some states, and we might say the state of Utah executed this criminal. But the state didn't do anything. The state is made up of people, and the executioner is the one that carried out that execution. Just like in economic principles of all kinds, it's the individual that makes the decision or drives the choices. It's the CEO of the company that drives the company choices a lot of times. Okay, let's move on to a few more principles of economics, and then I want to talk about the broken window fallacy. So another principle your author points out here, Jeff Hammond points out, is that with economics, we need to understand that oftentimes value is subjective, or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if we're talking about sports cards, not cars, but cards, like baseball cards or football cards, someone that doesn't like sports cards might see a rare card and say, I'd pay $100 for that, or I'd pay $10 for that. But there are some, like a very rare graded Mickey Mantle rookie card. Some people might be willing to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for that, while others might not be, right? It might be the same for watches, where some people might be like, I'll pay $30,000 for a Rolex, and other people are like, I wouldn't pay more than $100 for that same exact item. So value can be subjective, which makes economics a bit of an inexact science sometimes. And then another assumption, or another economic assumption that your author covers, is people prefer more to less. Generally speaking, we prefer more to less. And we tend to want that more today rather than tomorrow. So if we could, for the same price, get double the product, we're going to do that. That's why people love sales. We get more for less. Okay, so let's look at process versus outcome. And so this is where people oftentimes will point to socialism or communism as the way to go to equalize all things. And Jeff Hammond's going to say that inequality in economics is usually a result of market process, right? So when we look at things, we don't expect, like, there's no way I'm going to be an NBA player, right? And if I were an NBA player, there's no way I'm going to be better at basketball than LeBron James. So he's going to get paid more because he brings more money in because he draws the fans in. So he commands a higher salary because of the bigger draw, because of how good he is and how dynamic he is on the court. Still not the GOAT, Michael Jordan's the GOAT. But so he gets a higher salary because he brings more value to the team and to the franchise. So that would be an example of economic inequality, right? And there's really no way to level that playing field across all dynamics and all criteria, right? So some people have better hand-eye coordination. And even if you give them, like with golf, a handicap, right, they still aren't playing at the same level, right? You have to try to artificially level the playing field. That still doesn't always get the job done. So your author's going to note that we're assuming equality with socialism and communism is the goal, when God made LeBron James and God endowed him with these gifts and talents to be very good with sports, with hand-eye coordination, with strategy, with timing. So God may have endowed him with more of that talent than others. And we also see that in the parable of the talents, which it's a monetary unit. But two of the stewards seem to be better endowed with making a profit on their talents than the steward that hid his. So also, your author is going to give examples of that. He's going to say, I'm just going to quote him, one cannot conclude that income inequality in and of itself is necessarily inconsistent with God's will. So sometimes people just don't work as hard as other individuals, and so they don't produce as much. And that'd be an example with the parable of the talents. Sometimes natural disaster, drought, famine in the Bible, or we just say circumstances affect people. Sometimes people are actually taken advantage of by the powerful leaders, by the leadership or the regime. And so they're not able to produce as much. Sometimes people just choose to be poor. Like think of nuns, monks, priests, they take a vow of poverty. And so that inequality, we would say, exists because they want it to. And then sometimes God just provides for people, like Job, for example. Job was a righteous man, but was a very, very wealthy man. And God blessed him with wealth. So also sometimes people become rich on the conversely, right? Like people become rich through hard work sometimes. People become rich through God's blessing, or sometimes people do become rich in the Bible from exploiting the poor. And God does not like when people exploit the poor. So your author is going to say that basically, while we can't say that God prefers one economic market over another, what we can say is God gives us stewardship, and examples of stewardship and examples of stewardship of private property are in the Bible. So the question isn't necessarily, does God prefer the free market? But the question is, how can I be the best economic steward with what God has given me? That's the real question that the author is going to point out. All right, I'm going to pause for a second, let you digest that, and now we're going to move on to the broken window fallacy. So this is really important because you have a quiz on this. We'll talk about it in class, but this is one of the weirdest economic fallacies I think I've ever encountered, and it's called the broken window fallacy, and it's the idea, okay, so let's say there's a baker, and this baker was going to buy a new suit, but some kids go by a shop, chuck a brick through his window and break the window. And the baker's really mad because now he has to take that $50 that he was going to buy a suit at Temu with, right, or at Wish.com, and now he has to buy a Wish.com window. So people will come by and say, well, it's not that bad of a thing actually, because it's still benefiting, because that $50 is going now to the company that produced the window, and it's going to their workers. And they're missing the point entirely. They're going to say that stimulates the economy. But if you look at this on a broad scale, think about this really broadly for a minute, the broken window fallacy. If this is true, if destruction breeds profit, because that's the principle in the broken window fallacy is, okay, the window was broken, it was destroyed. So now the baker has to take money and spend it on a new window that he was going to spend somewhere else, right? And the fallacy is destruction breeds profit, or destruction breeds prosperity economically. If this were true, we'd be burning down the world, right? If this were actually true and not a fallacy, we'd be like, oh, if breaking things or destroying things makes us richer and helps the economy grow, why don't we just burn down the entire world and we'll have infinite money? That sounds really silly, right? Well, let's shrink it down a little bit. What if we just burn down all the homes in Pennsylvania, right? Or like the California wildfires. What if we just, all those homes are destroyed, if we try to say that'll just spike the economy. It'll be a booming economy. They'll be richer than ever. No, if that were true, we would do it. But what happens is money that would be spent on new items elsewhere is now spent to replace old items that didn't need to be replaced. So It's taking money from new growth that might spur on new innovation, new activities, new economic prosperity to replace something that was already there that didn't need to be replaced in the first time or the first place. So if the broken window fallacy were true, we'd all be leveling our houses because it'd make us all rich, right? But it doesn't. So the idea behind the broken window fallacy, because some people misunderstand it, it's not that money doesn't go into the economy. It does go into the economy, but the fallacy is that destruction breeds profit, and it doesn't. So that's basically what I've got for you for today. I want you to remember, because you're gonna have a quiz on it, make sure to look at again or review again the 4 principles of biblical anthropology. And then you do that quiz is due today. And then you have a quiz that's due, 2 quizzes due tomorrow, one of which is on Adam Smith, whom we'll talk about tomorrow in class, and the other is on the broken window fallacy. If you feel confident enough on the broken window fallacy, you can take that quiz today. Otherwise, you can take that tomorrow. If you have any questions, please reach out. Otherwise, hope you guys have a great day.